Breathless, Daron landed on a rocky outcropping and laid himself against it. From his hip pouch, he withdrew a telescoping spyglass. Extending it, he held it up to his right eye and looked upon the encampment that dominated the horizon. He surveyed the slave camp where he hoped to find his abducted sister, Sheila. He's been pursuing her captors for months. Through leads and prayers, he'd find abandoned camps and mass graves. The slavers left a wake of devastation as they migrated from region to region. From mining up all the natural resources to deforestation to mass hunting, they left behind them a barren world. When they came upon a settlement or principality, these savages were known for leaving no man alive and taking every woman and child with them for the slave block. The thought alone of these cretins being out here punished his heart. Sheila had tried to oppose these monsters. Having learned of their movements and practices, she tried to warn the various village leaders of the impending invasion. If only he had listened to her, given her more than a cursory glance when she pleaded with him for his intervention. He simply ignored her every plea, and now he suffers thinking of his sister being captive in a place like this. He scanned tent to tent and pen to pen until he spotted a girl who looked like Sheila. She was naked, shivering in the cold. Two men entered the frame and forced their way into the pen that held her. The other women and children slid away from them as they entered the pen, avoiding direct eye contact. Their will was broken, but Sheila remained defiant.
Get away from me, you monsters! I'd rather die than let you touch me!
The woman he observed, the likeness of his sister, shouted at the men, confronting them with the fierce will of a tigress. She'd die before anyone put their hands on her. After a few seconds of pushing her around, she pounces on one of the men and bites the tip of his nose.
Ah, you little wench!
He cries out in sheer pain as she spits the bloody clump from her mouth. With a backhanded slap, he knocks her to the ground, but his hands quickly rush back to the bloody stump that was once a dominant feature on his face. Wasting no time, Sheila makes a run for the rocky field that surrounds the camp, but she is quickly met by an inhumanly massive raider who places himself in front of her. It's with cold eyes that he looks down upon her, then grins. He snaps forward and grabs her by the hair. She tries to maneuver away from him, but the two guards from the holding pen move in behind her. With batons made of shimmering black metal that emanated a paralyzing aura, they begin to jab her in the ribs, back, and abdomen. The force of their beating is so severe that she loses the ability to hold herself up under her strength. Braden grips his spyglass with horror as he watches the demonic raider drag his sister towards the central stage. Upon the stage, a large altar that appeared to be made from the same shimmering black metal of the batons. Having lost his place after averting his eyes, he spots a naked woman with a male phallus between her legs. The woman was looking at him from the distance. Daron wasn't sure if the woman could see him, with him being so far away within the rocky cliffs. He couldn't notice that the woman looked numb, her eyes blank and cold, despondent as the raider and the penkeepers tortured his sister. For hours they listened to her wails and moans, as they did ungodly things to her flesh and body.
Daron, help me, please, help me!
Daron repeatedly whispered his sister's name, Sheila, as they rended her flesh and removed living bones from her body. Each act was equal part dominance and part ritual. Pieces of her were put in cauldrons and joined by a child-sized demon, their wings plucked from their backs. The tiny demons were bound using metal chains, clamps, and staples. Of course, they'd fight for their freedom as they were dropped into the cauldrons along with the living pieces of his sister.
Bind them tighter. They must not escape.
A mage in priest robes would then circulate around the cauldrons, adding other ingredients from the pouch, suspended around his waist. And then he would order the penkeepers to cover the cauldrons with shaped bone boxes adorned with gemstone ornaments. As they tore more pieces from her, Daron offered another prayer to his gods, Kobakatse. He begged for a quick relief from the punishment, and that her immortal soul be swiftly carried up into the higher realms. His mind hearkened back to her resilience. She refused to go without a fight. She fought against her captors and refused to submit. He had watched her fight and resist. His heart being filled with the same resolve, he sat on his heels upon the rocky outcropping of the shelf, and he opened his heart and mind to commune with his gods. He begged his gods to hear his prayers. As a priest, he had learned the various rituals and prayers to commune with his gods. From beneath his robes, he withdraws a symbol of Kobakatse, twin dogs each with 8 rounded teats exposed. The sisters stood back to back, and they hold above them both the sun and the moon, one inside the other. After tracking his sister for months through dense forests and treacherous mountains, Daron lays on a rocky outcropping, looking through a spyglass. Atop this vantage point, he spies at the camp of slavers that raided the town his sister lived in, leaving no woman behind and no man alive. Finally spotting Sheila, he watched, horrified as she is pulled naked from the slave pen. Two humans laugh as they push her around between themselves.
Crying out, "Get off me!"
One of them cries out as she bites the end of his nose off. Sheila turns and begins to run, only for an inhumanly muscled male to be standing in her way. The thing shakes its head and reaches out slowly with one hand. She tries to back away, but the other human moves up and holds her in place from behind, bending her head down. The hand closes the distance, and an inhuman grin creases its face. For hours, Daron listens to his sister scream as the demon agonizingly disembowels his sister. Grief washes over Daron time and time again as he watches helplessly from afar. As a priest to the gods, his prayers have power, though even against these odds, he would have been far outmatched. He can't help but bow his head and hope for revenge, release, or something to help those poor souls still enslaved. Just as he was about to open his eyes, he felt the impressions of pure joy. He could swear it was his sister's voice as she communed with her God in paradise. He got a glimpse of a heavenly woman who then stretched out her hand, and then a being of vast primordial power filled the space. If he had to give words to the feeling he had, it would have been, "Be cleansed."
Run.
Opening his eyes, he stood up, turned around and began running. As the stillness and quiet of night took over, he continued to run, heedless of the dangers in the forest. Deep into the next day, still he ran. Late that night, as he was barely able to continue walking, he heard it. A loud grinding tearing of stone on stone, and then a loud crack far off in the distance. So loud that it sent him sprawling, and unable to rise, he turned on his back. Off in the distance, dark cloud rose into the air, and a moment later an earthquake ripped through the land, a single yet powerful quake.